I am Clara, 33, and until a few weeks ago, I thought the hardest part of hosting my family was tolerating their passive aggressive insults. I was wrong. Have you ever spent over $3,000 on premium Wagyu beef and imported truffles to feed your relatives only to receive a secret audio recording that proves they are actively plotting to render you homeless? That is exactly what happened to me on a bright Saturday morning. Instead of confronting them with tears or anger, I canceled the feast, locked down my estate, and let them walk right into a legal trap they built themselves. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart toxic family members who completely underestimated your intelligence. Trust me, you will want to hear how I turned their malicious eviction plot into an airtight felony charge. The morning of the annual family picnic started like any other major gathering I hosted. The sun was shining beautifully over the rolling green hills of my $4 million estate in upstate New York. I stood in my custom-built outdoor kitchen, carefully marinating thick cuts of expensive Wagyu beef and shaving fresh truffles for a complex risotto. For years, I had been the designated family bank and event planner. I worked as a senior supply chain executive for a high-end organic food company. It was a demanding high-pressure job that required me to manage international logistics and negotiate massive corporate contracts. That career allowed me to afford a lifestyle my family could only dream of. Yet, in the eyes of my mother Brenda and my older sister Vanessa, I was nothing more than the tragic family spinster. I was 33, unmarried, and entirely childless. To them, my executive career meant absolutely nothing compared to Vanessa being a married suburban mother. They treated me like a glorified caterer who just happened to have a nice place to host their lavish parties. What they did not know, what I had carefully kept hidden to avoid their endless entitlement and greed, was that I owned every single inch of this massive property. I had bought the estate entirely in cash 2 years prior through a private limited liability holding company. My family firmly believed I was just renting a ridiculously oversized house out of sheer loneliness and desperation. They thought I was foolish with my money, constantly reminding me that I should downsize to a small apartment because I had no husband to fill these empty rooms. I let them believe what they wanted because it kept the peace and prevented them from demanding I pay off their mortgages. I wiped my hands on my pristine white apron, looking out over the manicured lawn where the professional caterers I had hired were setting up elegant linen tables. I had spared absolutely no expense for this event. The floral arrangements alone cost more than Vanessa pays for her monthly mortgage. I wanted everything to be absolutely perfect, hoping that just for one day, my mother and sister might actually appreciate my efforts instead of finding a new way to tear me down and belittle my existence. I was just reaching for a bottle of imported olive oil when my phone buzzed violently against the marble countertop. It was a text message from a completely unknown number. There was no greeting, no name attached, and no context provided. It was just a single audio file sent from an untraceable burner phone. My brow furrowed in deep confusion. I almost deleted the message right then and there, assuming it was some kind of elaborate spam or marketing scam, but an unsettling intuition in the pit of my stomach made me tap the screen. I dried my hands thoroughly on a towel, picked up the phone, unlocked the screen, and pressed play. The recording was incredibly clear and high quality. The ambient background noise sounded like a bustling local coffee shop with the faint clinking of ceramic mugs, but the voices speaking were entirely unmistakable. It was my mother Brenda and my older sister Vanessa. They were speaking in those hushed, conspiratorial tones they always used whenever they were discussing me behind my back at family functions. My heart began to beat a little faster against my ribs, but I forced myself to stand perfectly still and listen to every single word. I recognized the highly familiar grating cadence of Vanessa complaining. She was whining endlessly about her upcoming 10th wedding anniversary celebration. She had been married to Jamal, an incredibly patient African-American architect, who was quite frankly far too good for her for a solid decade. But right now, Vanessa was throwing an absolute tantrum because she could not afford to rent a luxury venue for her milestone event. She wanted something grand, something spectacular that would make her high society friends deeply envious, but her credit cards were apparently completely maxed out from her reckless spending habits. I leaned closer to the phone, letting the upbeat summer playlist from my outdoor speakers become completely drowned out by the venom dripping from my own mother voice. Brenda was trying to soothe Vanessa, promising her golden child that she would have the absolute perfect venue without paying a single dime out of pocket. The sheer entitlement in their casual conversation was absolutely staggering to witness. But what came next made the warm summer blood freeze completely in my veins. Brenda confidently laid out a master plan that was as vicious as it was utterly absurd. Just use Clara rented estate, my mother told Vanessa with zero hesitation. I will demand she hand over the keys at the picnic today. If she refuses, I will call her landlord and report that she is breeding dogs illegally to get her evicted immediately. She is 33 and alone. She belongs in a cramped studio apartment somewhere in the city, not a beautiful mansion. It is your turn to enjoy that property. Vanessa laughed, a sharp, cruel sound that I had endured my entire life. That is brilliant, Mom, Vanessa replied eagerly. She does not even use half those rooms anyway. We can just take over the lease once the landlord kicks her out onto the street. The audio file clicked off, leaving me standing in the warm morning breeze feeling completely and utterly numb. I looked down at the expensive stainless steel chef knife resting in my right hand. It hovered over the marble counter, trembling slightly as the horrific reality of their conversation washed over me like a bucket of ice water. My own mother and sister were not just insulting me behind my back like they usually did. They were actively conspiring to render me completely homeless. They were perfectly willing to destroy my housing record, ruin my credit, and throw me out onto the street simply because Vanessa wanted a free luxury venue for a single anniversary party. They saw my life, my hard-earned stability, and my peace of mind as totally disposable commodities meant to serve their selfish desires. The sheer audacity of their malicious plan was staggering, entirely fueled by their misguided belief that I was just a vulnerable tenant at the mercy of some strict, faceless landlord. They had absolutely no idea they were plotting to steal property from the actual legal owner of the estate. I set the knife down. The clatter of metal against marble echoed loudly. Any guilt about keeping my success a secret evaporated instantly. I looked at the lavish spread of food I had prepared. The artisan cheeses, the Wagyu beef, the vintage wines. I had done this for people who would gladly watch my life burn to keep themselves warm. A calculating calm settled over my mind, replacing the shock. I was an executive who managed global supply chains and negotiated multi-million-dollar contracts daily. I handled corporate sabotage before morning coffee. If my family wanted to play a high-stakes game of real estate theft, I was ready to show them how outmatched they were. This was no longer a family dispute over a picnic. It was a declaration of war. I reached for my phone. My mind 10 steps ahead. Every past interaction suddenly replayed in my head. The times Brenda asked overly specific questions about my lease agreement. The times Vanessa wandered through my hallways measuring the rooms with her eyes. They had been plotting this hostile takeover for months. I took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill my lungs. I was not the helpless woman they fabricated in their minds. I was the architect of my own destiny, and I refused to be a casualty. I looked at the risotto simmering gently on the stove. It was time to clear the table. The feast was officially over. My retaliation would be swift and devastating. There were no tears stinging my eyes. There was no urge to scream or throw plates against the wall. Instead, a terrifying and absolute clarity washed over me. I stood in the middle of my sprawling outdoor kitchen, breathing in the scent of fresh pine and blooming hydrangeas, processing the sheer audacity of my family. They genuinely believed I was just a vulnerable tenant, desperately clinging to a lease I could barely afford. Brenda and Vanessa thought they held all the cards in this twisted family dynamic. They thought my single status made me weak, a pathetic spinster occupying space meant for someone better. I turned my attention back to the massive spread of food I had prepared for them. The imported artisan cheeses, the expensive charcuterie boards. the custom pastries, and the beautifully marbled Wagyu beef that cost me over $3,000. 10 minutes ago, I was meticulously arranging these delicacies to impress people who secretly despised me. Now I looked at the feast with absolute disgust. I was certainly not going to feed these absolute traitors a single delicious bite of my hard-earned culinary efforts. Moving with swift, mechanical precision, I began pulling heavy-duty insulated coolers from the storage pantry. I packed the vacuum-sealed cuts of Wagyu beef straight into the fresh ice. I grabbed the untouched wheels of brie, the jars of black truffle paste, and the delicate custom desserts, placing them carefully into the remaining coolers. This premium food was not going in the trash. It was going to the local women's shelter downtown. They would appreciate a high-end organic feast far more than my ungrateful mother and sister ever could. I stripped the elegant linen tablecloths, folding them aggressively and tossing them into a laundry bin. I removed the expensive floral centerpieces, tossing them straight into the compost bin. Within 20 minutes, the entire outdoor kitchen and dining area was completely stripped bare. It looked exactly like an abandoned patio. There was no trace of a party, no lingering smell of roasted garlic or grilled meats, just cold marble countertops and empty spaces. I dragged the heavy coolers out to the driveway and loaded them into the back of my SUV. The exhausting physical labor felt incredibly grounding and cathartic. Every time I slammed a cooler shut, I imagined shutting the door on another one of their toxic expectations. They expected a grand picnic prepared by their obedient servant. Instead, they were going to arrive at an empty, silent property. I wiped my hands on a clean towel, tossing it onto the counter. The professional catering staff I had explicitly hired for the long afternoon was scheduled to arrive in exactly 1 hour. I quickly sent a mass text to the event coordinator paying them their full rate, but telling them the event was canceled and they did not need to come. The stage was now completely clear and ready for the next phase. With the physical preparations completely finished, it was time to secure the perimeter of my home. I pulled my smartphone from my pocket and opened my comprehensive smart home management application. My estate was equipped with a state-of-the-art security system, something I had installed immediately after purchasing the property, to ensure my personal safety. I navigated smoothly to the highly restricted access control menu on the customized software dashboard. Over the past year, I had assigned temporary gate codes to Brenda, Richard, and Vanessa for emergencies. My thumb hovered over their names on the bright screen. With 3 quick, decisive taps, I permanently revoked every single access privilege they held. The app confirmed their codes were officially deleted from the main server. Next, I systematically accessed the main gate controls for the primary entrance. The property was surrounded by 10-foot-high wrought iron fencing securing the entire boundary. I tapped the icon to trigger the absolute lockdown protocol. In the distance, I heard the heavy mechanical groan of the iron gate sliding firmly shut, the industrial magnetic locks engaging with a loud, definitive thud that echoed across the lawn. No one was getting in without my explicit digital authorization. I then switched over to the surveillance tab. I activated all 16 high-definition security cameras positioned strategically around the property. I adjusted the specific angles on the main gate cameras, ensuring I had a perfectly clear, unobstructed view of the entry keypad and the driveway approach. I synced the live high-definition video feed directly to my iPad, testing the audio receivers to confirm I could hear everything happening at the gate. The system was utterly flawless. The microphones picked up the gentle rustling of the wind through the ancient oak trees. My estate was now an impenetrable fortress. Brenda and Vanessa had planned to waltz in, eat my expensive food, and then formally demand my keys. They were about to encounter a heavily locked iron gate, an absolute punishing silence. The legal trap was set perfectly, the perimeter security was tight, and the digital evidence was securely backed up on multiple encrypted cloud servers. I grabbed my purse, my keys, and my iPad, feeling a surge of pure adrenaline replacing any residual heartbreak. I walked out of the front door, locking the heavy deadbolt firmly behind me. I climbed into the driver's seat of my large black SUV, verifying the heavy coolers full of premium food were perfectly secured in the back. I started the engine, the quiet hum of the luxury vehicle matching my intensely focused mood. I drove slowly down the long, winding driveway, using my master remote to open the iron gates just long enough for me to slip through before they slammed shut and locked permanently behind me. I merged smoothly onto the quiet country road, leaving my beautiful estate behind. I drove a few miles into the nearby town and pulled into the drive-through of a local cafe. I ordered a large iced coffee, my voice completely steady and calm when I spoke to the barista through the speaker. I paid. The cashier took the cold plastic cup and drove quietly back toward the estate boundaries. I parked my large SUV on a slightly elevated public shoulder, about a quarter of a mile down the road. It was an absolutely perfect vantage point for my incoming operation. I was completely hidden behind a thick grove of evergreen trees, but I had a direct line of sight to my front gates. I situated myself extremely comfortably in the driver's seat, taking a long, refreshing sip of my iced coffee. I propped my iPad up securely on the center console, the high-definition security feed streaming flawlessly in real time. The digital clock on my dashboard read exactly noon. The family was scheduled to arrive at 12:30 sharp. I leaned back heavily against the comfortable leather headrest, the cool air conditioning humming softly and steadily in the quiet cabin of my car. I had set every single element perfectly in motion. The very first domino had been pushed, and now all I had to do was confidently sit back and wait for the magnificent destructive crash. The relentless ringing of my phone finally ceased, leaving a heavy, expectant silence inside the cabin of my vehicle. I watched the security feed on my iPad for another moment, observing Brenda pacing furiously on the gravel driveway, while the extended family wiped sweat from their foreheads with empty serving platters. It was time to let them in on the joke. I had no intention of calling my mother back to engage in a screaming match. Arguing with a narcissist is a completely pointless endeavor. They thrive on the emotional reaction, feeding off the defensive energy you give them to twist the narrative and make themselves the ultimate victim. I was not going to give Brenda the satisfaction of hearing my voice tremble or my breathing hitch. Instead, I opted for a cold corporate approach. In business, you do not argue with a hostile takeover attempt. You simply present the indisputable paperwork and let the cold facts speak for themselves entirely. I picked up my phone and navigated past the dozens of missed calls and aggressive voicemails. I opened the massive family group chat. There were exactly 20 members in this digital gathering space, including aunts, uncles, older cousins, and my immediate family. For years, this group chat had been a tool for Brenda and Vanessa to broadcast their flawless lives and subtly undermine my existence. Today, it was going to serve a completely different purpose. I took a slow, deliberate breath, steadying my fingers as I prepared to drop the absolute bomb. I selected the anonymous 5-minute audio file I had received earlier that morning. I did not edit or trim the recording at all. I wanted the extended family to hear every single second of the malicious plotting, the cruel laughter, and the undeniable entitlement. I attached the audio file to the group chat, watching the loading bar fill with a sense of profound finality. The digital progress bar moved swiftly, carrying the heavy weight of my entire lifetime of subjugation. I was not just sending a simple voice memo. I was systematically dismantling the toxic hierarchy that had controlled my family for over 3 decades. The file finished uploading, sitting silently in the chat window, a ticking time bomb waiting to be detonated by 20 different smartphones at the exact same moment. I adjusted my grip on the steering wheel, preparing myself for the inevitable fallout. I could not simply send the audio file without providing the proper context. The extended family needed to understand exactly why they were currently baking in the intense summer heat outside a locked gate. I tapped the message field and began typing, my thumbs flying across the digital keyboard with practiced executive precision. I wanted my words to be absolutely flawless, stripping away any possibility for Brenda or Vanessa to play the victim card. I typed my message carefully, reading it aloud in the quiet cabin of my car to ensure the tone was sufficiently detached and utterly devastating. To the people planning to have me evicted today so Vanessa can steal my home, the picnic is completely canceled. The locks are changed. Good luck calling my landlord. Signed, the property owner. I stared at the short, sharp paragraph. It was a masterpiece of corporate efficiency applied to domestic warfare. The revelation that I was the actual property owner was the fatal strike. For years, they had mocked my supposed inability to afford a decent lifestyle, completely unaware that my career in supply chain management allowed me to purchase a $4 million estate in cash. The sheer irony of them planning to call a non-existent landlord to evict me from my own property was almost too poetic. I reviewed the text one last time, ensuring there were absolutely no grammatical errors or emotional pleas. There was no room for misinterpretation. I was delivering a lethal dose of reality directly to their smartphones. I took a deep breath, feeling a surge of adrenaline flood my system, and decisively pressed the send button. The message appeared in the chat window immediately below the audio file. A tiny notification popped up indicating the message had successfully delivered to all 20 participants in the family group. The trap was now fully sprung. I leaned closer to my iPad, my eyes locked onto the high-definition security feed. The delay between the digital delivery and the physical reaction would be merely a few seconds. I held my breath, waiting for the exact moment the notification would ping on their devices. The silence in my vehicle was profound, a sharp contrast to the absolute devastation I was about to inflict upon the people who had treated me like disposable garbage my entire life. I was truly ready to watch them all finally and completely burn. Through the crystal clear screen of my iPad, I watched the digital massacre unfold in real time. It happened in a synchronized wave. 20 different smartphones simultaneously vibrated and chimed in the pockets and purses of the people standing on my sweltering driveway. I saw heads bow in unison as aunts, uncles, cousins, and my immediate family pulled out their devices to check the group chat. For a fleeting second, the driveway was completely silent. Then a cacophony of overlapping audio began to play. I could not hear the sound through the camera feed, but I did not need to. The body language was universally communicative. I watched the exact second the audio recording hit the part where Brenda confidently detailed her malicious plan to have me evicted. The collective reaction was instantaneous and explosive. An older aunt standing near the white BMW literally dropped her expensive ceramic serving platter. It shattered against the gravel in a spectacular burst of white shards, but nobody even flinched or looked down. All eyes snapped violently upward, targeting Brenda and Vanessa like laser beams. The collective gasp of sheer horror was so dramatic it practically vibrated through the digital feed. The extended family, who had been completely oblivious to the vicious dynamics hidden beneath my carefully curated public image, were now bearing direct witness to her absolute depravity. I watched my uncle point an accusing finger directly at Vanessa, his face contorted in visible disgust. Another aunt covered her mouth with both hands, shaking her head rapidly as the audio file continued to play. Brenda cruel dismissal of my life and career. The shock was turning into palpable outrage. These relatives had driven hours expecting a luxurious free meal hosted by the family spinster. Instead, they were listening to irrefutable proof that their beloved matriarch was plotting to steal real estate and render her own daughter homeless. Jamal stood silently near the back of the group, his arms crossed over his chest. He did not look surprised in the slightest. He looked like a man watching a highly anticipated demolition. The structural integrity of my entire social standing was collapsing in real time. I watched the chaotic scene play out, feeling a deep, vibrating sense of vindication. They could not hide behind polite smiles anymore. The entire extended family was watching the mask slip, revealing the ugly, greedy monsters lurking underneath. My mother, Brenda, face drained of all color, transforming her usually vibrant complexion into a sickly, chalky white. Through the camera feed, I watched her mouth open and close soundlessly as she desperately searched for a lie that could possibly explain away her own recorded voice. There was absolutely no defense available. The crisp, undeniable audio left zero room for her typical gaslighting tactics. My sister Vanessa panicked instantly. The golden child frantically waved her hands in the air, physically stepping toward the aunts and uncles in a desperate attempt to defend herself. I could see her shouting, her face contorted in ugly defensive rage, but the extended family was not having any of it. The betrayal was too immense, the cruelty too blatant. Disgusted and thoroughly appalled, my oldest uncle simply shook his head, turned his back on Brenda, and marched directly toward his vehicle. That single action triggered a mass exodus. The entire entourage of relatives turned around in unison. They ignored Brenda frantic pleas and Vanessa hysterical crying. Opening their car doors and climbing inside, the engines roared to life, kicking up a massive cloud of dust from the gravel. One by one, the vehicles reversed aggressively out of my driveway, leaving the toxic core of my family completely stranded at the locked gates. The cloud of dust slowly settled, revealing a truly pathetic scene. Brenda, Richard, Vanessa, and Jamal were left standing utterly alone in the blistering heat. The luxurious picnic they had demanded was canceled. Their public reputation was entirely obliterated. The sprawling $4 million estate they had confidently planned to steal remained safely secured behind heavy iron bars. I took one final, incredibly satisfying sip of my iced coffee, locked the iPad screen, and smiled. The calculated revenge was an absolute, undeniable perfection. I sat in the air-conditioned comfort of my vehicle for another 20 minutes, simply watching the aftermath play out on my digital screen. Brenda and Vanessa were pacing wildly on the gravel driveway, waving their arms in furious, highly animated gestures. Richard looked completely defeated, leaning heavily against his luxury sedan, while Jamal stood entirely apart from them, staring blankly at the heavy iron gates. Eventually, the stark reality of their public humiliation and intense physical exhaustion set in. Without the captive audience of extended relatives to manipulate and control, the dramatic performance quickly lost its appeal. Brenda snatched her wide-brimmed hat off her head, marching toward her vehicle with aggressive, stomping steps. Vanessa followed suit, violently yanking the heavy door of her white BMW open and slamming it completely shut. Within minutes, the remaining vehicles retreated down the long country road, kicking up a final, pathetic cloud of dry dust. The sprawling estate was silent and entirely secure once more. I put my large SUV in drive, pulled smoothly onto the paved road, and headed straight toward my secondary apartment in the city. I knew this temporary strategic retreat was absolutely necessary. A narcissist backed into a tight corner never simply accepts defeat or takes personal accountability. They immediately pivot. They relentlessly rewrite history to ensure they remain the absolute victim in the eyes of the general public. By the time I navigated the dense weekend traffic and unlocked the front door to my sleek minimalist city apartment, my mobile phone was already vibrating with a new distinct pattern of urgent notifications. I walked directly into my kitchen, poured a tall glass of sparkling water, and opened my various social media applications. I did not need a crystal ball to accurately predict my older sister's next move. Vanessa had built her entire adult identity around flawlessly portraying the affluent, perfect suburban wife on the internet. Her curated digital image was her absolute most prized possession, and I had just detonated a massive bomb directly underneath it in front of our entire extended family tree. She urgently needed to quickly control the unfolding narrative before the aunts and uncles could spread the undeniable truth of the audio recording to her broader, influential social circle. She was already executing her desperate backup plan, fully determined to aggressively flip the script and secure unearned public sympathy by completely fabricating a tragic, twisted story of severe sibling betrayal, desperately hoping to permanently bury her own highly malicious, illegal actions under a mountain of carefully constructed lies. I tapped on the Instagram application and immediately saw a bright, glowing purple ring around Vanessa's profile picture, clearly indicating an active live broadcast was currently in progress. I clicked the circular icon, entering the streaming video silently. As an anonymous viewer using a secondary business account I maintained strictly for corporate market research, the dramatic scene playing out on my bright screen was an absolute masterclass in theatrical, emotional manipulation. Vanessa was sitting in the driver's seat of her expensive BMW, parked somewhere entirely unfamiliar. Her premium designer makeup was strategically smudged under her eyes, and she was actively forcing ragged, trembling breaths directly into the microphone. She stared intensely into the camera lens with wide, tear-filled eyes, launching immediately into a deeply disturbing, entirely fabricated narrative. She told her hundreds of attentive followers that her loving family was currently enduring an absolute unforeseen nightmare. She claimed with a violently shaking voice that I was currently suffering from a severe undiagnosed mental breakdown. According to Vanessa, my prolonged embarrassing status as a single childless woman had finally driven me to violent, uncontainable jealousy over her upcoming 10th wedding anniversary milestone. She spun a wild, highly detailed story about how I had maliciously lured the unsuspecting family to the estate under the guise of a peaceful summer picnic only to lock them out in the dangerous, blistering heat in a sudden fit of psychotic, uncontrollable rage. Then came the absolute most audacious lie of all. Vanessa completely dismissed the damning audio recording I had boldly sent to the large group chat. She looked right at the camera lens, wiping away a single fake tear, and confidently declared that I had utilized highly sophisticated artificial intelligence software to purposefully fabricate a malicious deepfake audio file. She claimed I synthesized her voice and our mother's voice flawlessly to frame them for a cruel real estate scam that never actually existed. She openly begged her gullible followers for their thoughts and prayers, portraying herself as the terrified, loving sister, desperately trying to get immediate psychiatric help for a deranged sibling who had completely lost her mind. The sheer pathological ease with which she delivered these heavy lies was truly breathtaking. She was actively weaponizing the societal stigma around mental health to frantically cover up her own documented, undeniable extortion plot, completely disregarding the extreme damage her words could cause to my professional reputation. The immediate digital fallout from her broadcast was swift, overwhelming, and intensely aggressive. Vanessa's high society friends, her wealthy suburban neighbors, and several distant acquaintances who had absolutely no accurate context for our actual family dynamics swallowed her dramatic performance completely without question. The livestream comments flooded rapidly with massive outpourings of deep sympathy for her and vitriolic, blinding hatred directed entirely at me. Before the long broadcast even ended, the flying monkeys were aggressively dispatched to do her dirty work. My personal mobile phone began pinging relentlessly. Direct messages poured heavily into my Instagram, Facebook, and professional LinkedIn accounts. Women I had met exactly once at Vanessa's lavish wedding a full decade ago were suddenly sending me massive paragraphs of unsolicited, vicious condemnation. They boldly called me a bitter, toxic, lonely spinster. They aggressively accused me of trying to permanently destroy a beautiful, loving family out of sheer, unadulterated, pathetic jealousy. One particularly aggressive, highly inappropriate message from her personal trainer demanded I seek immediate, forced psychiatric institutionalization before I physically harmed someone. The barrage of notifications was absolutely relentless, a highly coordinated digital attack specifically designed to overwhelm my mental defenses and forcefully push me into a panicked, emotional public reaction. Brenda had clearly deployed her own extensive network as well to aid the character assassination. Several older, wealthy women from her exclusive country club left incredibly nasty, condescending voicemails on my personal number, expressing their profound, absolute disgust at exactly how I was treating my poor, dedicated, long-suffering mother. They artfully painted Brenda as a saintly, exhausted matriarch constantly suffering at the cruel hands of a deeply deranged, ungrateful daughter. The sheer, overwhelming volume of the targeted harassment would have completely broken anyone else. It was meticulously designed to isolate me, to make me feel completely surrounded alone and universally despised by the entire world. They desperately wanted me to frantically log online, type out desperate lengthy paragraphs desperately defending myself, and engage in a messy, highly public screaming match that would only serve to validate Vanessa's bold claim that I was emotionally unstable and entirely out of control. My initial human instinct was a burning, intense desire to aggressively defend my hard-earned reputation. I wanted to release the raw, unedited security footage, post the official property deeds, and publicly annihilate every single person harassing me. But I was not just an angry, betrayed sister. I was a highly trained corporate executive who thoroughly understood the immense undeniable strategic value of absolute unbothered silence. When you argue with a toddler throwing a tantrum, you lower yourself to their level. Silence, on the other hand, drives a raging narcissist completely insane because it entirely deprives them of the crucial emotional fuel they desperately need to sustain their fabricated victim narrative. I set my glass of water down firmly on the kitchen island. I did not block the incoming hostile messages, and I certainly did not reply to a single one of them. Instead, I calmly activated a professional screen recording software program on my tablet. I methodically documented every single defamatory post, every threatening direct message, and every highly slanderous claim made in Vanessa's ridiculous live broadcast. I cataloged the mounting digital evidence with the exact same meticulous precision I utilized to rigorously audit massive supply chain contracts. Defamation and libel were actionable civil offenses, and Vanessa was building a massive, highly lucrative lawsuit against herself on a public platform. I muted all incoming notifications across my various devices, restoring absolute unbroken peace to my quiet apartment. I poured myself a generous glass of expensive red wine and walked slowly over to my large bay window, looking down thoughtfully at the bustling, vibrant city streets far below. They genuinely thought this coordinated digital smear campaign was a brilliant, highly effective counterattack. They had absolutely no idea they were just freely handing me the heavy, undeniable legal evidence I needed to destroy them permanently. The very next strategic move was mine, and I was going to be absolutely unapologetically ruthless. The deep purple hues of twilight had fully settled over the city skyline, casting long, dramatic shadows across the polished hardwood floors of my living room. I stood completely still by the expansive bay window, the crystal wine glass feeling cool and heavy in my hand. The absolute silence of my apartment was a stark, welcome contrast to the chaotic digital war zone I had just systematically muted. I took a slow, measured sip of the robust Cabernet, savoring the rich, complex flavors, as my mind meticulously categorized the legal evidence I had just finished securing. Vanessa and Brenda thought their aggressive online smear campaign was a lethal countermeasure, completely unaware that their frantic, defamatory broadcast was the exact legal ammunition my corporate attorneys would eventually use to utterly destroy them. I was calculating the precise timeline required to file the formal cease and desist orders when a sudden sharp sound broke the profound quiet of my sanctuary. It was a single firm knock on my heavy oak front door. My entire body tensed instantly. My secondary city apartment was an extremely closely guarded secret. I had never shared this specific residential address with a single member of my toxic family, utilizing a private corporate holding company to manage the lease specifically to prevent Brenda from orchestrating unannounced invasive visits. The heavy security downstairs in the luxury lobby required explicit resident authorization for any guest access. No one could simply bypass the concierge desk and ride the private elevator up to my floor without prior clearance. I set my wine glass down onto the kitchen island with extreme care, ensuring the delicate crystal did not make a single sound. I moved silently across the dark living room, my bare feet making absolutely no noise on the smooth floorboards. I approached the front door, my heart beating a steady, cautious rhythm against my rib cage. I pressed my eye against the brass peephole, half expecting to see my mother standing there with a malicious glare. Instead, the distorted hallway lens revealed a tall, familiar figure looking profoundly exhausted. It was Jamal, Vanessa's husband. He was standing completely alone in the warmly lit corridor, wearing a dark tailored suit, his broad shoulders slumped in obvious heavy fatigue. I unlocked the heavy deadbolt with a swift, decisive click and pulled the door open just wide enough to maintain a defensive physical barrier. Jamal looked up, his dark brown eyes reflecting an immense, crushing exhaustion that I immediately recognized. It was the distinct, hollow look of someone who had finally reached the absolute limits of their psychological endurance. He did not try to push his way inside or offer a fake, polite family greeting. Instead, he simply reached into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket and held out a small, metallic silver flash drive. He stood there silently, offering the digital device like a crucial peace offering across enemy lines. I stepped back, pulling the heavy door open wider to let him into the quiet apartment. Jamal stepped inside, the tension in his broad shoulders visibly releasing the moment the heavy door clicked securely shut behind him. He walked straight into the ambient light of the living room, completely bypassing the plush seating area, and handed the flash drive directly to me. "I sent the anonymous audio recording this morning, Clara," he stated, his deep voice carrying a quiet, unwavering resolution. I placed a tiny voice-activated digital recorder deep inside Vanessa designer handbag yesterday afternoon. I originally planted the device because I strongly suspected she was hiding massive financial secrets from me. I thought I would catch her discussing hidden credit card debt with her friends. I never imagined I would capture her and your mother actively plotting a malicious real estate scam to systematically destroy your life and render you completely homeless. I stared at the small silver flash drive resting in the palm of my hand, the sheer magnitude of his absolute betrayal of the golden child slowly washing over me. Jamal was a highly intelligent, intensely private architect who had spent the last decade quietly observing the toxic dynamics of my family. He had always played the role of the supportive, silent husband, expertly avoiding the collateral damage of Brenda's constant emotional warfare. But standing in my living room looking utterly drained yet fiercely determined, he was no longer playing the compliant background character. Jamal walked over to the kitchen island, leaning his heavy frame against the cool marble countertop. "The silver flash drive in your hand contains the original unedited audio file," he explained, running a tired hand over his closely cropped hair. "But that is not all it contains." Once I retrieved the recording device from her purse, I plugged it into my secure workstation to review the captured audio files. What I found was infinitely worse than a simple family dispute over a picnic venue. Jamal looked directly at me, his expression hardening into cold, calculated anger. "Vanessa has secretly opened 3 massive high-interest credit lines using my personal social security number. She expertly forged my signature on the digital applications and completely maxed out a staggering $50,000 in secret fraudulent debt to fund her lavish lifestyle and maintain her fake wealthy persona online." My jaw tightened as I processed the severe criminal implications of his discovery. But the financial fraud was only the beginning of the betrayal. Jamal took a deep breath, his dark eyes locking onto mine with absolute burning intensity. The recording device also captured multiple hours of highly explicit, undeniable conversations between Vanessa and her personal fitness trainer. They have been carrying on a full-blown, extremely reckless affair for the past 6 months. She actually used the fraudulent credit card she opened in my name to book luxury hotel suites for their weekly afternoon encounters. She sat in the passenger seat of my car, laughing with her lover on the phone about how incredibly clueless and gullible I was. The sheer level of disrespect and outright criminal behavior she has engaged in is absolutely unforgivable. I gripped the silver flash drive tightly, feeling a profound surge of respect for the man standing before me. Jamal had endured an unimaginable, deeply humiliating betrayal from the woman he loved, yet he had remained remarkably calm, meticulously collecting his own heavy arsenal of undeniable receipts, instead of confronting her blindly. He was executing a flawless, strategic dismantling of his incredibly toxic marriage. "I have officially retained the most ruthless, aggressive divorce attorney in the entire state," Jamal continued, his voice dropping to a low, lethal timbre. "I am completely done playing the compliant, supportive husband to a narcissistic, fraudulent criminal. I refuse to let Vanessa and your mother destroy another innocent person to maintain their pathetic, desperate illusion of superiority. I gave you that audio recording this morning because I needed you to know exactly what kind of monsters you were dealing with before they could launch their hostile eviction plan. I needed to warn you, Clara, because I knew you were the only person in that entire twisted family who had the actual intelligence and corporate ruthlessness to fight back and win." I walked over to my liquor cabinet, pulled down a second crystal wine glass, and poured him a generous measure of the expensive Cabernet. I handed the glass to him, our eyes meeting in a silent, powerful agreement. We were no longer just estranged in-laws forced to tolerate each other at awkward holiday dinners. We were now strategic battlefield allies completely united by our shared trauma and our mutual, burning desire to see Brenda and Vanessa face the absolute crushing consequences of their malicious actions. I am the sole legal owner of that $4 million estate, I told him, watching the profound realization dawn on his handsome face. I purchased it entirely in cash 2 years ago through a private corporation. They locked themselves out of a property they can never touch. Jamal let out a low, deeply appreciative chuckle, taking a slow sip of the dark red wine. That is absolutely brilliant, he murmured, a genuine, dangerous smile finally breaking through his heavy exhaustion. We have all the undeniable evidence we need to bury them both permanently, Clara. They are completely outmatched, and they have absolutely no idea what is coming. I raised my crystal glass, clinking it gently against his in a crisp, finalizing toast to our new lethal partnership. The game had fundamentally changed, and together we were going to completely obliterate them. This alliance marked the absolute beginning of their catastrophic, irreversible downfall, completely assuring our flawless victory over their toxic manipulations. We were going to win. The entire course of our impending retaliation was now perfectly set into motion. We possessed every single document and recording required to ensure they would face immediate, overwhelming justice. The next calculated phase of our operation was about to brilliantly and effortlessly unfold. Just watch. Over the next 4 days, my newly minted alliance with Jamal proved to be the most devastatingly effective strategic advantage I had ever secured. While I managed my global supply chains from the pristine quiet of my downtown office, Jamal seamlessly executed his crucial role as the ultimate double agent inside enemy territory. He continued playing the part of the exhausted, compliant husband, quietly navigating the chaotic aftermath of the driveway incident, while secretly feeding me a steady stream of highly sensitive intelligence. The encrypted text messages he sent me painted a vivid, pathetic picture of a family in absolute catastrophic freefall. The public humiliation they suffered at my locked iron gates had triggered a massive ripple effect throughout their entire social circle. The aunts and uncles who had witnessed the damning audio recording had not stayed silent. The undeniable truth of Brenda and Vanessa's malicious plot spread like absolute wildfire through their exclusive country club and affluent suburban neighborhood networks. Jamal texted me updates describing how Brenda had been completely shunned at her weekly charity committee meeting. The prominent society women she usually dominated had politely but firmly asked her to step down from her leadership position, citing the highly disturbing rumors circulating about her treatment of her own daughter. Vanessa was faring even worse. Her perfectly curated digital empire was rapidly crumbling under the severe weight of public scrutiny. Her high society friends were actively distancing themselves, canceling lunch dates, and ignoring her frantic phone calls. The severe social isolation was driving both women completely insane. They were pacing the floors of their expensive homes, violently blaming me for utterly ruining their flawless reputations, instead of taking even a fraction of personal accountability for their own recorded actions. Jamal described the toxic atmosphere inside the house as absolutely suffocating. Vanessa was desperately seeking a massive public redemption, terrified that her fast-approaching 10th wedding anniversary would become a complete social failure if nobody showed up to celebrate her fake perfection. She needed a massive, undeniable victory to prove to her skeptical friends that she was still the wealthy, successful golden child she pretended to be online. She urgently needed to reclaim the false narrative, and her sheer desperation was pushing her directly toward an incredibly dangerous, highly illegal precipice. I read Jamal's messages with calculated satisfaction, knowing their desperation was the catalyst required to make a fatal mistake. On Wednesday evening, Jamal sent me a highly urgent encrypted message requesting a completely secure phone call. I immediately stepped into the soundproof glass conference room at my corporate office and dialed his encrypted number. The absolute severity in his deep voice sent a sharp jolt of pure adrenaline racing directly through my veins. He had just finished discreetly planting his sophisticated voice-activated recording device inside the formal dining room of Brenda's sprawling suburban house. knowing that Vanessa had moved back in temporarily while claiming she needed intense emotional support during my supposed psychological crisis. What he captured on that tiny device elevated their petty domestic squabbles into the realm of severe, highly punishable criminal offenses. Jamal explained, his tone laced with absolute disbelief, that Vanessa had stupidly promised all 150 of her elite high society friends that her massive anniversary celebration would still absolutely take place at my luxury estate. She had completely convinced her gullible social circle that my non-existent landlord was legally transferring the imaginary rental lease directly into her name as a compassionate gesture due to my fabricated mental collapse. Because Vanessa simply could not physically bear the humiliating shame of officially canceling the extravagant event. She and Brenda were currently hatching a breathtakingly desperate, undeniably illegal master plan. Jamal played the newly intercepted audio file for me over the encrypted connection. I listened in absolute stunned silence as my own mother calmly instructed my older sister on the precise methodical mechanics of committing blatant document forgery. Brenda was explicitly coaching Vanessa on how to flawlessly trace my signature onto a generic downloaded residential lease agreement they had illegally procured from the internet. They were actively fabricating a highly fraudulent legal contract that explicitly listed Vanessa as the primary authorized tenant of my $4 million property. The sheer, terrifying audacity of their criminal plotting was practically suffocating. They were not merely being greedy or emotionally manipulative anymore. They were actively conspiring to commit multiple severe felonies just to maintain a fragile, fake social image. I gripped my mobile phone tightly, my knuckles turning completely white, as I processed the incredible gravity of their extreme stupidity. They were willingly handing me the exact legal leverage I desperately needed to destroy them permanently. Their breathtaking arrogance would soon become their ultimate, incredibly inescapable undoing, sealing their inevitable tragic and well-deserved fate entirely. Jamal continued to lay out the horrifying, meticulous details of their incredibly deranged operational goal. Through the crystal-clear audio feed, we listened together as Brenda aggressively dictated the exact timeline of their impending criminal invasion. Their ultimate strategy was as completely ridiculous as it was highly malicious. They fully intended to utilize the completely fraudulent, newly forged residential lease agreement to legally hire a specialized commercial locksmith from a neighboring county, deliberately choosing an out-of-town contractor who would be completely unaware of the local property ownership dynamics. They confidently planned to present the fake paperwork to this unsuspecting professional, explicitly directing him to aggressively bypass the heavy iron security gates and violently drill through the expensive reinforced deadbolts securing the main house. Once they had successfully breached the physical perimeter of the $4 million estate, their grand master plan was to aggressively claim temporary tenant access or pseudo-squatter rights under the deeply flawed assumption that local law enforcement would view it as a complex civil dispute between a desperate landlord and a legal tenant. They assumed this fabricated legal gray area would successfully prevent the local police from immediately evicting them from the premises. They desperately needed to maintain this incredibly fragile illegal occupation for exactly 48 hours. That extremely narrow window of time was strictly to allow Vanessa to host her massive, lavish anniversary party for her 150 high society guests that upcoming Saturday evening. They were fully prepared to aggressively commit felony breaking and entering, actively destroy expensive private property, and relentlessly lie to sworn law enforcement officers, all simply to ensure Vanessa could drink expensive champagne on my manicured lawn and falsely portray herself as a successful, wealthy woman to her superficial friends. The sheer, overwhelming scale of their deeply narcissistic delusion was genuinely hard to fully comprehend. They were treating a major, highly secure piece of private real estate like a disposable, easily manipulatable party venue, completely ignoring the massive, life-altering legal consequences hovering directly over their heads. Jamal sounded incredibly disgusted as he summarized the final portions of their arrogant criminal conversation. They were so utterly blinded by their own supreme sense of entitlement that they genuinely believed they were completely invincible. They assumed I would be too psychologically broken and overly intimidated by their aggressive tactics to ever effectively and decisively fight back today. The encrypted phone call grew deeply quiet for a long, heavy moment. I could hear Jamal breathing steadily on the other end of the secure digital connection, completely anticipating my impending emotional reaction to this incredibly severe, deeply violating familial betrayal. Clara, he finally asked, his deep voice thick with profound protective concern. Should I intervene right now to stop this madness? I can easily walk into that formal dining room, loudly confront them with the active recording device, and aggressively shut this entire criminal forgery operation down before they actually print the fake documents. I closed my eyes tightly, resting my forehead against the cool, transparent glass of the soundproof corporate conference room wall. My mind rapidly processed the massive, overwhelming legal implications of the extraordinary evidence he had just provided me. If he stopped them right now, they would merely be guilty of having a highly malicious, ugly private conversation. They would immediately play the victim aggressively, deny their true intentions, and simply slither away without facing any severe, permanent legal consequences. I opened my eyes, a cold, utterly ruthless corporate shark smile slowly spreading across my face in the empty, silent room. Jamal. I said, my voice completely smooth, dangerously calm, and totally devoid of any residual familial affection. There is a fundamental, heavily tested rule in business strategy and total warfare. You must never, ever interrupt your enemy when they are actively engaged in making a massive, catastrophic mistake. Do not stop them. Do not confront them. Do not give them a single tiny warning. I want you to step back completely into the shadows. Let them finish writing that fraudulent document. Let them forge my legal signature. Let them confidently dig their own extremely deep, highly permanent, and utterly inescapable graves right now without interruption. Early the next morning, I secured a half-day from my rigorous executive schedule to orchestrate the next critical phase of our counteroffensive. I arrived promptly at the sleek downtown offices of my high-powered real estate attorney. His name was David, a sharp and ruthlessly efficient legal mind who had previously handled the incredibly complex private cash acquisition of my $4 million estate 2 years prior. Walking into his expansive corner office overlooking the city skyline, I felt a familiar surge of cold, calculated corporate energy. I sat confidently across his massive mahogany desk and calmly laid out the entire unbelievable situation. I presented him with the original anonymous audio recording. Jamal detailed written testimonies regarding the fraudulent credit lines and the ongoing affair, and finally the explosive new evidence regarding the impending forgery plot. I explained precisely how Brenda and Vanessa were currently fabricating a residential lease agreement with my forged signature. I detailed their ridiculous strategy to hire an out-of-town commercial locksmith to illegally bypass my heavy iron gates and violently drill through my reinforced deadbolts. I watched David's expression shift rapidly from professional curiosity to absolute, unadulterated astonishment. He set his expensive pen down on his polished desk, shaking his head in sheer disbelief at the breathtaking stupidity of my toxic family members. He had dealt with highly aggressive corporate acquisitions and bitter commercial property disputes for over 2 decades, but he openly admitted he had never witnessed a family so eagerly and confidently conspire to commit such severe, easily provable crimes just to host a single, superficial anniversary party. The sheer scale of their narcissistic delusion was officially a matter of intense legal scrutiny. I handed him the encrypted digital file containing the audio Jamal had captured from the formal dining room. David listened to Brenda actively coaching Vanessa on how to trace my signature flawlessly. He took meticulous notes, his legal mind already formulating the most destructive, airtight response possible to permanently neutralize this incredibly malicious threat against my private property. I wanted to ensure every single legal base was completely covered before I executed my final strike. I demanded total, unyielding legal protection for my highly valuable real estate assets against their predatory actions. David leaned back in his plush leather chair, steeping his fingers together as he analyzed the exact legal parameters of our impending trap. Clara, he began, his voice laced with absolute professional certainty. My strongest legal advice to you is to practice absolute restraint. Do not block their initial entry. Do not send them a warning text if they simply plan a party. It is a minor civil dispute. However, if Brenda and Vanessa present a deliberately forged lease agreement to sworn law enforcement or even a licensed commercial locksmith to gain unauthorized access to your private estate, the entire situation instantly escalates from a petty family grievance into a multi-count felony indictment. David explicitly outlined the severe criminal charges they were actively bringing upon themselves. By fabricating the residential lease, they were committing forgery in the first degree. By utilizing that fake document to deceive a professional contractor into breaking the locks, they were committing felony fraud. Finally, the exact moment they physically crossed the threshold of my main house without my explicit legal consent, they would be actively committing felony breaking and entering. He explained that by allowing them to present the forged document to an authority figure, we would completely remove any possibility of them claiming it was a simple misunderstanding. The intent to defraud would be permanently cemented into the official police record. I felt a thrilling wave of absolute satisfaction wash over me. My corporate shark instincts were entirely validated by my legal counsel. By exercising strategic patience, I was giving my mother and sister the exact amount of rope they needed to hang themselves completely. They firmly believed their fake paperwork would shield them from any immediate consequences. They assumed local authorities would view the situation as a messy tenant dispute, buying them the exact 48 hours they desperately needed to host Vanessa's lavish anniversary celebration. They were relying entirely on my presumed weakness and their own fabricated authority. David immediately began drafting the necessary legal affidavits, preparing to swiftly present my original deed of trust and unencumbered title documents to the appropriate authorities. We were building an inescapable legal fortress, ensuring that when the trap finally snapped shut, there would be absolutely zero escape routes available for either of them. With my legal strategy flawlessly cemented, I immediately initiated the next crucial phase of our operation. I left David's office and drove directly to the local county sheriff precinct, located just a few miles from my sprawling estate. I knew the county sheriff quite well. He was a highly respected, no-nonsense man who deeply appreciated the massive charitable donations my organic food company made annually to the local community food banks and agricultural programs. I requested a private meeting and was escorted directly into his office. I sat down and presented him with my certified deed of trust, officially proving beyond any shadow of a doubt that I was the sole, unencumbered legal owner of the $4 million property in question. I calmly informed the sheriff that I had received highly credible intelligence regarding an active impending plot to illegally breach my security gates and occupy my main house that coming Saturday. I explicitly warned him that the perpetrators were planning to utilize a completely forged residential lease agreement to deceive a commercial locksmith and falsely claim tenant access. I provided him with a detailed list of the vehicles my family members drove and a comprehensive breakdown of their anticipated timeline. The sheriff reviewed my certified property documents with severe, unwavering professionalism. He was visibly disturbed by the sheer audacity of the planned infiltration. He assured me that his deputies would be placed on high alert and strategically positioned near my property line on Saturday morning. We coordinated a specific operational plan. I would monitor the high-definition live feed from my hidden driveway security cameras. The exact second Brenda and Vanessa presented the forged lease to the locksmith and physically breached the iron gates, I would transmit a direct signal to the precinct. The sheriff promised a rapid, overwhelming response to apprehend the trespassers actively in the commission of multiple felonies. I thanked him for his swift cooperation, feeling an incredible sense of empowerment. I had successfully weaponized the local law enforcement apparatus to protect my hard-earned assets. My toxic family had spent my entire life attempting to tear me down, yet here I was commanding the respect of high-powered attorneys and local authorities. The contrast between my legitimate, undeniable power and their fragile, fabricated illusion of control was absolutely staggering. I returned to my secure city apartment to finalize the last meticulous details of our absolute retaliation. Jamal and I needed to perfectly synchronize our operational timelines to ensure he remained completely insulated from the catastrophic legal fallout heading straight for his wife. We communicated over our highly encrypted channels, carefully reviewing the strategy step by step. Jamal informed Vanessa that he was being urgently deployed on an unexpected mandatory business trip for his architectural firm. He packed a small suitcase, kissed his deceitful wife goodbye, and drove away from their suburban home, effectively providing himself with an airtight, undeniable alibi for the upcoming weekend. However, Jamal did not actually leave the city limits. Instead, he drove his vehicle directly to my secure apartment building. I had officially transformed my spacious guest room into a highly functional digitized war room. We set up multiple monitors streaming the live high-definition security feeds from every single angle of my $4 million estate. Jamal unpacked his bag and settled into the command center with a look of profound, unwavering determination on his face. We spent the evening reviewing the camera angles, testing the audio receivers, and finalizing our direct communication line with the county sheriff dispatch. The anticipation crackling in the air between us was absolutely electric. We were two survivors of intense familial abuse, finally taking complete permanent control of our own destinies. The long, exhausting years of enduring Brenda, relentless gaslighting, and Vanessa arrogant narcissistic abuse were officially coming to a highly explosive, deeply satisfying conclusion. We had meticulously set the stage and secured every single possible legal advantage. There was absolutely nothing left to do but sit back and aggressively wait for the spectacular crash. The trap was flawlessly ready. They had underestimated my sheer power for the very last time. Tomorrow, their entire superficial world would permanently burn down to ashes. The undeniable truth of their actions was about to be laid bare for the entire county to witness. I poured us both a fresh cup of dark roast coffee, staring intently at the glowing monitors illuminating the dark room. We were completely ready for this final battle. Friday morning arrived with bright sunlight streaming through the blinds of my city apartment. Jamal and I had barely slept. The digital monitors in my makeshift war room illuminated our tired but fiercely determined faces. I sat in my ergonomic desk chair, my eyes glued to the high-definition live feed from the concealed cameras positioned discreetly along the outer perimeter of my $4 million estate. At precisely 9 in the morning, a familiar, pristine white vehicle slowly crept into the frame. It was Vanessa luxury SUV. The vehicle rolled to a complete stop just 50 yards away from the heavy iron security gates I had locked down almost a week prior. The driver's side door popped open and my older sister stepped out, looking nervously over her shoulder. My mother Brenda followed closely behind her, clutching a thick manila folder tightly against her chest. I knew exactly what that folder contained. It held the fabricated, illegally forged residential lease agreement they intended to use to steal my property. Through the crystal-clear audio feed, Jamal and I could hear their hushed whispers carrying on the gentle morning breeze. They were actively scouting the perimeter. Brenda confidently assured Vanessa that my absolute silence over the past few days was definitive proof of my complete mental collapse. She arrogantly proclaimed that I was likely hiding in a dark studio apartment somewhere utterly defeated and entirely incapable of defending my own home. They walked confidently along the wrought iron fencing, pointing out where the catering tents should go. The sheer blinding arrogance radiating from the digital screen was truly staggering. They felt no remorse for their actions. They felt no guilt for plotting to ruin my life. They were entirely consumed by their own shallow greed and their desperate need to maintain a fake social standing. I watched my mother trace her fingers along the ornate ironwork of my front gate, her face twisted into a smug, victorious sneer. She genuinely believed she had successfully conquered me. I took a slow, deep breath, maintaining absolute emotional control. The stage was set, the actors were entirely in position, and the curtain was finally rising on their spectacular downfall. A tense hour passed before the next phase of their criminal operation commenced. The high-resolution cameras picked up a battered utility van turning onto the private driveway. It was exactly what my real estate attorney David had predicted. Brenda had intentionally avoided hiring reputable bonded local professionals who might recognize the property or ask complicated legal questions. Instead, she had sourced a shady out-of-town contractor willing to ask zero questions for the right price. A burly man carrying heavy power tools stepped out of the rusted van looking skeptically at the massive security gates. Brenda immediately marched up to him, aggressively waving the manila folder in his face. Through the enhanced audio receiver, I heard her loudly proclaim that she was the authorized property manager dealing with a highly unstable, deeply troubled tenant who had illegally changed the locks. She shoved the blatantly forged lease agreement directly into the contractor's hands. The man barely glanced at the fraudulent paperwork before Brenda reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a thick stack of physical cash. She handed him the money, explicitly promising him double his usual rate under the table if he could bypass the heavy iron security gates and violently drill through the reinforced deadbolts securing the main house. Jamal leaned forward in his chair, his jaw clenching tightly, as we watched the contractor pocket the bribe and fire up a massive industrial drill. The piercing, high-pitched scream of metal grinding against metal echoed loudly through the audio feed. It was deeply violating to sit there and passively watch a stranger physically destroy the expensive security systems I had installed to protect my sanctuary. My heart pounded aggressively against my ribs, but I forced myself to remain completely seated. I gripped the edge of the desk, grounding myself in the cold, logical reality of our legal strategy. I had to let them fully commit the crime. If I stopped the locksmith right now, Brenda would simply lie her way out of it, claiming it was a terrible misunderstanding about a lost key. I needed the felony to be undeniably cemented in the official record. I watched sparks fly from the heavy drill as it bit into the custom ironwork of my front gates. The contractor shoved his heavy tools back into his bag, stepping back as the massive magnetic locks finally gave way with a heavy, defeated clank. The physical perimeter was officially breached. The moment the heavy iron gates slowly swung inward, Brenda and Vanessa literally jumped into the air, cheering and clapping their hands together like victorious conquerors. It was a deeply sickening display of unadulterated entitlement. They confidently strutted onto the manicured gravel driveway, acting as if they had just rightfully inherited a massive royal estate. Vanessa aggressively kicked off her designer heels, running barefoot across the pristine green lawn of my property, spinning around with her arms wide open. She loudly proclaimed to her mother that the space was absolutely perfect for her lavish 10th anniversary celebration. The sickening sound of her joyous laughter echoed through the hidden microphones, making Jamal shake his head in utter disgust. The initial breach was immediately followed by a highly coordinated, massive invasion of commercial logistics. Brenda pulled out her smartphone and began making rapid, demanding phone calls. Within 20 minutes, a massive convoy of heavy commercial delivery trucks began rolling straight through my violently compromised front gates. The sheer scale of the operation was truly breathtaking. A massive white catering van lumbered heavily onto the grass, its thick tires leaving deep, muddy ruts across the pristine, professionally landscaped lawn I paid thousands of dollars to maintain. Next came a sprawling flatbed truck carrying a massive white event tent, followed closely by a smaller vehicle hauling a polished wooden dance floor and hundreds of elegant wooden chairs. Brenda stood in the center of my property, aggressively pointing her finger and shouting loud, demanding instructions at the various delivery drivers and event coordinators. She was completely in her element, bossing around working-class people while standing on stolen land. Vanessa was busy taking dozens of selfies on my expansive wrap-around porch, aggressively posting to her social media accounts about her stunning exclusive anniversary venue. They were violating my most private sacred space, transforming my quiet sanctuary into a chaotic, crowded commercial event space. I watched a team of workers aggressively hammer massive steel stakes directly into my expensive underground irrigation system to secure the event tent. Water began to pool slowly on the grass, but Brenda completely ignored it, demanding they set up the expensive floral archway near the waterfront. They were entirely brazen, acting with the blinding confidence of people who genuinely believed they would never face a single consequence for their destructive actions. I sat in the dim light of the war room, my fingers moving rapidly across my laptop keyboard as I systematically documented every single detail of their catastrophic invasion. I was a meticulous corporate auditor compiling a highly destructive invoice. I captured dozens of high-definition screenshots showing the heavy delivery trucks aggressively destroying my expensive landscaping. I logged the exact time the locksmith violently destroyed the gate locks, estimating the replacement cost at nearly $10,000. I documented the specific commercial catering companies and event rental businesses trespassing on my land, ensuring I could subpoena their operational records later to prove Brenda had fraudulently contracted them using my stolen property. The financial damages were aggressively racking up by the minute, transforming their illegal entry into an incredibly costly civil liability case on top of the impending criminal felony charges. Jamal sat beside me, equally focused, downloading the audio clips of Vanessa proudly boasting about tricking her mentally unstable sister out of her property lease. Every arrogant word she spoke was another nail aggressively hammered into her own coffin. The sun set on the monitors, casting long, dramatic shadows across the sprawling white event tent, now firmly erected on my ruined lawn. The chaotic flurry of delivery trucks finally ceased, leaving my estate looking like a lavish, highly exclusive country club prepared for a massive gala. Brenda and Vanessa locked the damaged front doors of my main house, unaware I was watching their every move. They drove away in their luxury vehicles, feeling utterly victorious and completely untouchable. I closed my laptop with a sharp, definitive click. The illegal infiltration was entirely complete. The massive physical and financial damage was meticulously recorded. The trap was now officially armed and fully loaded. There was absolutely no turning back for either of them at this specific point. They had finally crossed a severe legal line, and I was definitely going to ensure they fully paid the absolute maximum possible price for their truly unforgivable arrogance. Saturday morning dawned with an eerie, deceptive tranquility. I had slept for perhaps 3 hours on the small sofa in my war room, my mind buzzing with the electric anticipation of the impending confrontation. Beside me, Jamal was already awake, nursing a mug of black coffee while staring intently at the glowing security monitors. The massive white event tent on my ruined lawn billowed slightly in the gentle morning breeze. Overnight, the sprawling estate had been entirely transformed into a scene straight out of a high-end luxury lifestyle magazine. The sheer scale of the theft was breathtaking to witness in the harsh light of day. Dozens of commercial catering staff in crisp white uniforms swarmed across my property, setting up polished silver chafing dishes and arranging hundreds of crystal champagne flutes on long, elegant tables. A massive floral archway bursting with expensive imported orchids and cascading white roses framed the picturesque view of the serene waterfront. Valet parking attendants hired under a fraudulent contract began setting up their podium near the violently destroyed iron security gates. By 2 in the afternoon, the first wave of luxury vehicles began rolling up the gravel driveway. Vanessa 150 exclusive high society guests arrived dressed in impeccable cocktail attire, entirely oblivious to the fact that they were actively participating in a massive, coordinated felony trespassing operation. Women in colorful designer dresses and men in sharp-tailored suits mingled happily on my patio, holding delicate hors d'oeuvres and sipping expensive vintage wine. The bright, cheerful sounds of a professional string quartet, tuning their instruments, drifted through the hidden exterior microphones I had strategically installed around the main house. It was an absolute masterclass in superficial grandeur, built entirely on a foundation of malicious lies and stolen property. I watched my sister Vanessa emerge from the main house wearing a stunning floor-length silver gown that glittered aggressively in the afternoon sun. She floated down the grand stone staircase with the practiced, arrogant grace of a reigning monarch surveying her conquered kingdom. She looked utterly triumphant, completely convinced that she had successfully outsmarted me and claimed my hard-earned sanctuary as her own personal trophy. Through the highly sensitive audio feeds connected to my porch cameras, I listened closely as Vanessa greeted her wealthy, influential friends. The level of pathological lying she engaged in was truly staggering. "Oh, thank you so much for coming," I heard Vanessa gush to a group of well-dressed women admiring the estate. "Yes, the property is absolutely gorgeous. My sister was having a very severe, unfortunate mental episode recently, so my mother and I generously stepped in to take over the lease and save the property from being abandoned. It is practically ours now, and we just knew it would be the perfect venue for our 10th anniversary." She laughed a high tinkling sound that made my blood run absolutely cold. She was utilizing my fabricated mental collapse as a quirky, entertaining cocktail party anecdote to elevate her own social standing. Nearby, my father Richard stood near the outdoor bar, swirling a glass of expensive scotch. He was chatting amiably with a group of businessmen, completely ignoring the fact that the heavy iron gates at the end of the driveway had been violently drilled open and physically destroyed. He was willfully blind to the massive legal violations occurring right under his nose, choosing instead to bask in the reflected glory of his golden child fake success. Brenda was equally immersed in the delusion, aggressively bossing the catering staff around and acting as the supreme matriarch of a dynasty she did not actually own. I watched them revel in their stolen luxury, feeling a profound, icy calm settle over my entire body. They were standing on a massive legal landmine, and they were currently dancing right on top of the pressure plate. Jamal shook his head in sheer disbelief. His eyes locked on the monitor, showing his deceitful wife accepting lavish gifts from her wealthy friends. "She really thinks she got away with it," Jamal murmured, his deep voice laced with absolute disgust. "She believes this fake reality is permanent." I reached over and closed my laptop with a definitive, satisfying snap. "Let them enjoy the appetizers," I said smoothly, grabbing my tailored black blazer from the back of my chair. "Because they are definitely not going to be around for the main course. It is time to go." We left the quiet sanctuary of my city apartment and drove directly to the local county sheriff precinct. My high-powered real estate attorney, David, was already waiting for us in the lobby, holding a thick, perfectly organized legal binder containing every single piece of undeniable evidence we had meticulously gathered. We were immediately ushered into the sheriff's private office. I laid out the final catastrophic updates. I provided the high-definition screenshots of the illegally hired locksmith destroying my gates, the time-stamped footage of Brenda handing over the fraudulent cash bribe, and the live confirmation that over 150 unauthorized individuals were currently trespassing on my private property. The sheriff reviewed the massive stack of evidence, his face hardening into a mask of severe, uncompromising professional authority. The presentation of the forged residential lease agreement to the commercial locksmith elevated this incident exactly as David had predicted. It was no longer a simple family dispute. It was a highly organized, multi-count felony operation involving extensive property damage and severe fraud. The sheriff immediately mobilized his tactical strike team. He dispatched 5 marked patrol cruisers and 2 large unmarked black tactical vehicles to form the primary response convoy. "Clara," the sheriff said, looking directly at me with absolute seriousness, "we are going to secure the perimeter and shut this illegal event down immediately. Once we have the primary suspects detained, we will bring you onto the property to officially identify them and formally press charges." I nodded, my corporate executive exterior completely locked into place. "I am fully prepared to prosecute them to the absolute maximum extent of the law," I confirmed without a single ounce of hesitation. Jamal, David, and I were escorted out to the secure parking lot and instructed to load into the back of the lead unmarked black police vehicle. The heavy tinted doors slammed shut, enclosing us in a tense, highly charged atmosphere. The engine roared to life, and the tactical convoy began moving swiftly out of the precinct parking lot, heading straight toward the stolen estate. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated the interior of the vehicle, casting sharp, dramatic shadows across Jamal's face. We did not speak a single word during the ride. The profound, heavy silence was completely filled with the electric, buzzing anticipation of impending absolute justice. The police convoy rolled swiftly down the winding, tree-lined country road leading toward my private property. As we approached the final mile, the heavy, rhythmic thumping of the professional DJ music began to vibrate through the floorboards of the tactical vehicle. The deep bass echoed through the quiet, affluent neighborhood, a glaring, obnoxious testament to Vanessa's supreme arrogance. They were throwing a massive, chaotic rave on the very lawns I had painstakingly curated for years. I sat perfectly still in the back seat, staring straight ahead at the dark partition separating us from the driving officers. I smoothed the lapels of my sharp black blazer, ensuring my appearance was flawlessly professional and utterly intimidating. I was not arriving as a betrayed, emotional sister. I was arriving as the absolute, undisputed legal authority of the ground they were currently dancing on. The convoy slowed as the violently damaged iron gates came into view. The hired valet attendants froze in sheer terror as the line of police vehicles pulled aggressively onto the gravel driveway, their silent, flashing emergency lights painting the massive white event tent in alternating shades of stark red and blinding blue. The music abruptly cut off with a loud screeching halt replaced by a sudden incredibly heavy silence that blanketed the entire estate. 150 wealthy high society guests stopped mid-sentence, turning their heads in collective, absolute confusion as uniformed law enforcement officers began stepping out onto the manicured lawn. I remained hidden in the tinted darkness of the unmarked vehicle, watching through the glass as Brenda and Vanessa finally noticed the flashing lights. The absolute panic that washed over their faces was the most beautiful, satisfying thing I had ever witnessed in my entire life. The final domino had just been aggressively tipped, and the crushing, spectacular collapse was officially underway. I took a slow, deliberate breath, letting the incredible reality wash over me. The agonizing years of their emotional abuse, the constant belittling of my career, and the relentless financial manipulation were ending right here on my terms. My immense patience had paid off flawlessly. They had literally invited the entire world to witness their own spectacular, unavoidable criminal destruction. The uniformed deputies moved with swift, highly coordinated precision, fanning out across the meticulously manicured lawn in a formidable tactical formation. Their heavy black boots aggressively crushed the expensive imported fallen flower petals that had been painstakingly scattered for Vanessa Grand's theatrical entrance. The stark, alternating red and blue emergency lights sliced violently through the approaching twilight, reflecting harshly off the crystal champagne flutes still clutched in the trembling hands of the bewildered high society guests. The absolute silence that had fallen over the sprawling estate was thick and incredibly oppressive, completely suffocating the previous atmosphere of unearned luxury. 150 affluent attendees stood completely frozen in their tracks, their expensive cocktail attire suddenly looking utterly ridiculous in the face of a massive, undeniably serious law enforcement raid. I watched a prominent local politician discreetly set his drink down on a silver tray and slowly back away toward the dense hedge line, desperately attempting to distance himself from whatever impending catastrophic scandal was about to detonate. The hired catering staff wisely retreated toward the outdoor kitchen, wanting absolutely no part in this dangerous confrontation. Through the heavily tinted glass of the unmarked tactical vehicle, I had a flawless panoramic view of the rapidly unfolding catastrophe. My heart beat with a steady rhythmic thrum of pure, unadulterated adrenaline. Jamal sat rigidly beside me, his breathing perfectly controlled, his dark eyes locked intensely onto his deceitful wife. Vanessa was standing near the massive floral archway, her glittering silver gown catching the harsh police lights like a disco ball. She looked exactly like a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming freight train, her mouth slightly ajar, her hands visibly trembling as she gripped her expensive designer clutch. She darted panicked, desperate glances around the silenced crowd, frantically searching for a convenient escape route that simply did not exist within the secured perimeter. My father, Richard, had completely retreated into the background, physically shrinking behind a group of towering floral arrangements to deliberately avoid the severe gaze of the advancing deputies. He was always a predictable coward when the heavy consequences of his enabling behavior finally arrived at his doorstep. But my mother, true to her blinding pathological narcissism, reacted entirely differently to the visual threat. She did not cower in fear. She did not freeze in panic. Instead, she aggressively puffed out her chest, squared her shoulders, and prepared to loudly assert her fabricated authority over sworn law enforcement officers. Brenda marched forcefully across the lush green grass, her expensive high heels sinking slightly into the soft turf with every aggressive stomping step. She moved with the blinding, unearned confidence of a woman who had never been firmly told no in her entire life. She aggressively bypassed a line of nervous whispering guests and marched directly up to the lead county sheriff, aggressively invading his personal space with absolute indignation. I watched the sheriff stand his ground firmly, his expression carved from absolute stone, as my mother began waving her arms in furious theatrical gestures. "Officer, there must be some sort of ridiculous, highly incompetent mistake here," Brenda announced. Her voice pitched loud enough to ensure her wealthy friends could hear her desperately attempting to control the collapsing narrative. "We are hosting a highly exclusive private anniversary event on these grounds. You are completely terrifying our invited guests and ruining an incredibly expensive celebration that we planned for months. I need you to order your men off this private property immediately before I contact your superiors." The sheriff did not even blink, crossing his muscular arms over his tactical vest as he stared down at her arrogant display. Brenda took his steadfast silence not as a severe impending warning, but as a direct invitation to double down on her massive fabricated delusion. She adopted a condescending, deeply patronizing tone, placing a hand dramatically on her chest like a wounded martyr. "If my severely unstable daughter Clara called your precinct today, you need to ignore her completely. She is currently suffering from a highly dangerous, catastrophic mental breakdown. She has been deeply jealous of her sister's beautiful marriage for years, and she is actively trying to ruin this special day out of pure psychotic spite. She does not even live here anymore. Her lease was terminated. We had to compassionately intervene just to save the property from total abandonment." I sat in the dark SUV shaking my head in sheer amazement at her absolute unflinching commitment to the lie. She was actively trying to gaslight a highly decorated law enforcement official while standing on the wrong side of violently destroyed iron security gates. She firmly believed that her polished suburban matriarch persona and her crisp, affluent accent would effortlessly shield her from basic legal scrutiny. She genuinely thought she could simply talk her way out of a multi-count felony infiltration by aggressively throwing her own daughter under the proverbial bus in public. It was the exact same toxic playbook she had successfully utilized against me for over 3 decades, but tonight she was trying to deploy it against the unforgiving criminal justice system. The sheriff let her finish her desperate lying monologue, his face remaining entirely impassive. He knew exactly who owned the estate. He had personally verified my certified deed of trust just hours prior. He was simply letting her dig the massive legal hole infinitely deeper. "Ma'am," the sheriff stated, his voice a low, commanding rumble that cut sharply through the tense, humid evening air. The verified property owner of record reported a severe unauthorized breach of the main security gates and a massive illegal occupation of these premises. Unless you can immediately produce highly verified, legally binding documentation proving you possess the explicit, authorized right to occupy this specific real estate today, every single person standing on this lawn is currently guilty of criminal trespassing." Brenda let out a loud theatrical scoff of pure disbelief, rolling her eyes dramatically for the benefit of the highly attentive watching crowd. She forcefully unclasped her designer handbag, digging her manicured fingers aggressively inside the expensive leather interior. She pulled out the thick manila folder I had watched her carry onto the property earlier that morning on the security cameras. She practically shoved the document directly into the sheriff's broad chest, her chin raised in ultimate unyielding defiance. "I have the completely valid, legally binding residential lease agreement right here in my hands," she declared proudly, her voice echoing across the silent stone patio. My daughter formally signed over the full tenant rights to us before she was temporarily hospitalized for her severe breakdown. As you can clearly see with your own eyes, everything is completely in order. Now please instruct your men to leave before I am forced to call the city mayor and formally complain about this outrageous targeted police harassment. I leaned forward tightly in my leather seat, my eyes locked intensely on the incredible exchange. This was the exact highly critical moment my real estate attorney David had explicitly warned us about during our strategy meeting. The very second she presented that fabricated document to law enforcement to officially claim legal rights to the property, the trap would violently snap shut on her neck. The sheriff took the manila folder, calmly opening it slowly in front of his body camera. He pulled out the forged lease agreement, his sharp eyes scanning the completely fake signatures and the sloppily copied legal jargon. He held the counterfeit document up in the fading sunlight, studying it with intense, deliberate scrutiny. The entire party held its collective breath, anticipating the final verdict. Vanessa stood completely paralyzed a few yards away, her hands clutching her pale face, as she watched her mother confidently hand over the literal instrument of their own total destruction. Brenda stood there with a smug, victorious smirk plastered brightly across her face, entirely convinced she had successfully outsmarted the entire local police department. She had absolutely no idea she had just voluntarily handed over the ultimate piece of physical evidence required to guarantee her own aggressive felony prosecution. She had effectively signed her own inescapable conviction. The sheriff looked up from the fraudulent papers, locking his gaze onto Brenda's arrogant face. He needed the legal parameters established for the official police report. "Ma'am?" he asked, his tone dropping into a deadly serious register. "Are you explicitly stating for the record that this is a valid document granting you access to this property?" Brenda let out an exasperated sigh, crossing her arms. "Absolutely," she stated with sheer condescension. "It is a legally signed lease. Now please leave immediately before you ruin my daughter's anniversary celebration." She had confidently spoken the final damning words. The sheriff nodded slowly. He carefully folded the fake lease agreement, sliding it securely into his protective tactical vest. The smug smile on Brenda's face completely evaporated as the sheriff slowly turned, locking his gaze onto our vehicle. "You can come out," he called out. The heavy, tinted door of the unmarked black tactical vehicle swung open with a smooth, decisive mechanical click. I stepped out of the dark, air-conditioned interior and planted my polished designer heels firmly onto the manicured gravel driveway. I smoothed the lapels of my impeccably sharp-tailored black blazer, keeping my posture entirely rigid and my expression absolutely unreadable. My high-powered real estate attorney, David, stepped out immediately behind me, clutching the thick, genuine leather portfolio containing my certified legal documents. As I walked slowly and deliberately across the lawn, toward the center of the chaotic scene, the harsh, alternating red and blue police lights illuminated my face for the entire crowd to witness. The color drained instantly and completely from my mother Brenda's face. Her smug, victorious smirk evaporated into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. She stumbled backward a fraction of an inch, her mouth hanging open soundlessly, as her brain desperately tried to process the impossible reality standing right in front of her. Less than 20 feet away, standing near the massive floral archway, Vanessa froze completely. Her eyes widened to the size of saucers reflecting the flashing emergency lights. The delicate crystal champagne flute she had been gripping so tightly slipped straight through her trembling fingers. It plummeted toward the expensive stone patio, shattering violently into hundreds of glittering, jagged pieces. The sharp, piercing sound of breaking glass echoed loudly across the eerily silent estate, slicing through the heavy, humid evening air like a gunshot. The 150 affluent high society guests held their collective breath, their gaze darting frantically between my imposing corporate demeanor and my mother's rapidly crumbling facade. I did not break eye contact with Brenda for a single second. I matched her horrified stare with an icy, unforgiving glare that communicated absolute, undeniable power. They had spent my entire 33 years on this earth trying to convince me I was small, insignificant, and entirely powerless, now standing on the very property they had so arrogantly attempted to steal. I was proving definitively that I was the absolute architect of their ultimate destruction. The time for passive-aggressive family dinners and quiet subjugation was permanently over. I approached the sheriff with measured, confident strides, fully prepared to deliver the lethal, undeniable truth that would finally end their reign of toxic, narcissistic terror. David stepped smoothly in front of me, taking immediate command of the legal confrontation with his deep, authoritative voice. He opened his leather portfolio and pulled out the crisp, state-certified deed of trust, holding it up clearly for the sheriff and the surrounding guests to see. Officers, my client is the sole, uncontested legal owner of this $4 million private property. David announced, his words ringing out with absolute devastating clarity. She does not rent this estate. She has never rented this estate. She purchased these grounds and the main house entirely in cash 2 years ago through a private corporate holding company which she completely controls. A loud collective gasp rippled rapidly through the stunned crowd of partygoers. The wealthy suburbanites whispered frantically to one another, their eyes wide with shock as the carefully constructed illusion Vanessa had fed them violently unraveled. David turned his sharp, piercing gaze directly onto my mother, who was physically shaking with fear. This fraudulent document that the suspect just willingly handed to law enforcement is a complete malicious forgery, he stated firmly, tapping the fake lease the sheriff held. My client never signed any residential lease agreement, nor did she ever grant these individuals any legal authority or temporary permission to access these premises, hire commercial contractors, or host a massive commercial event on her private lawns. Brenda tried desperately to speak, to formulate some kind of plausible lie to save herself, but her vocal cords completely failed her. She looked wildly toward my father, Richard, but he remained completely hidden behind the floral arrangements, entirely unwilling to defend his wife against such overwhelming, irrefutable legal evidence. My lawyer continued his aggressive, methodical dismantling of their criminal plot. The signatures on that document were illegally traced and entirely fabricated to deceive local law enforcement, and illegally claim squatter rights to a property they have absolutely no financial or legal connection to. They hired an unbonded, out-of-town, commercial locksmith to violently destroy my client. Expensive iron security gates and break through the reinforced deadbolts, securing the main residence. By officially presenting that counterfeit lease agreement to sworn police officers in an attempt to legitimize their severe trespassing, they have provided absolute indisputable proof of their intent to commit severe fraud. The trap had flawlessly snapped entirely shut. The seasoned county sheriff processed the new overwhelming evidence with a slow, definitive nod. He looked down at the forged paperwork in his hand, then shifted his stern, uncompromising gaze directly back to Brenda. The sheer gravity of the impending consequences settled heavily over the entire estate. "Ma'am," the sheriff stated, his voice a low rumbling warning that sent shivers down my spine. Presenting a deliberately forged legal document to sworn law enforcement officials in order to fraudulently claim ownership or tenant access to a private property is a severe felony offense. Furthermore, hiring an unauthorized contractor to physically destroy security barriers and gain entry into a secured residence constitutes felony breaking and entering. He reached slowly and deliberately toward the thick, heavy-duty tactical belt strapped securely around his waist. The metallic, ominous clinking of stainless steel handcuffs echoed sharply in the oppressive, silent atmosphere. Brenda's eyes bulged in pure, unadulterated panic as she finally realized the sheriff was not bluffing or easily intimidated by her arrogant, wealthy suburban housewife persona. "Wait, please wait. There is a massive misunderstanding here," Brenda stammered, desperately taking a frantic step backward as the uniformed deputies began to close the physical distance. "Clara is my daughter. We are a family. This is just a petty domestic dispute that got entirely out of hand. You do not need to arrest anybody." She looked at me, her eyes pleading silently, begging me to call off the police and save her from the ultimate public humiliation. But I stood completely motionless, my face a mask of absolute, unforgiving corporate stone. I did not flinch, and I certainly did not offer her a single ounce of salvation. You stopped being my family the exact moment you actively conspired to throw me out onto the street to secure a free party venue for your golden child, I replied, my voice completely devoid of any residual warmth or familial affection. The sheriff signaled to his deputies with a swift, decisive hand gesture. The officers moved in quickly and professionally, efficiently surrounding Brenda and effectively cutting off any potential escape route. The reality of her aggressive criminal actions was finally crashing down upon her head. The superficial, fabricated world of high society prestige she valued above all else was being violently ripped away, replaced entirely by the cold, harsh, and utterly inescapable reality of the criminal justice system. Right in front of her, 150 high society guests, the police officially read Brenda and Vanessa their Miranda rights. The loud, authoritative recitation of their constitutional rights to remain silent echoed humiliatingly across the expensive stolen dance floor. Two female deputies aggressively pulled Brenda's arms behind her back, the sharp, metallic snap of the heavy handcuffs locking securely into place. A few yards away, another pair of officers apprehended Vanessa. The moment the cold steel locked around her wrists, the golden child completely and spectacularly shattered. Vanessa dropped to her knees on the manicured grass, screaming and sobbing hysterically. Her expensive silver gown was instantly ruined by the damp soil. But she did not care. She wailed loudly, her makeup running in dark, messy streaks down her panicked face. "Daddy, please do something!" Vanessa shrieked, her voice cracking in absolute terrified desperation. "Call a lawyer. Tell them to stop. Please help me." She looked wildly toward the floral arrangements where our father Richard was still cowardly hiding. Richard stood completely paralyzed with sheer overwhelming fear, his face buried in his trembling hands. He was entirely unwilling to intervene or associate himself with their aggressive felony charges. He simply watched with wide, cowardly eyes as the deputies forcefully hoisted his favorite daughter back to her feet. The officers began marching Brenda and Vanessa slowly and deliberately across the long gravel driveway toward the waiting police cruisers. The massive crowd of affluent party guests parted instantly, creating a long, humiliating walk of shame. Dozens of smartphones were quietly raised, recording every single second of their devastating, highly public downfall. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated their tear-stained faces as they were aggressively pushed into the cramped, uncomfortable back seats of the marked patrol vehicles. The heavy doors slammed shut with a definitive ringing finality, securely trapping them inside. Their illusion of untouchable superiority was completely permanently obliterated. As the heavy doors of the police cruisers slammed shut, securing Brenda and Vanessa in the cramped back seats, the flashing emergency lights continued to sweep across the manicured lawn. The overwhelming reality of their impending incarceration had barely settled over the stunned crowd when the passenger door of the second unmarked tactical vehicle slowly swung open. Jamal stepped out into the humid evening air. He looked impeccably sharp in a tailored charcoal suit, his broad shoulders relaxed, and his posture radiating a profound sense of absolute peace. He did not look like a man whose wife had just been arrested for multiple felonies. He looked like a man who had finally been released from a suffocating decade-long prison sentence. Vanessa spotted him immediately through the thick, reinforced glass of the patrol car window. She began frantically banging her manicured hands against the glass, her face contorted in desperate, ugly pleading. One of the deputies, noticing her aggressive thrashing, rolled the rear window down just a few inches to ensure she did not physically damage the police vehicle. Jamal Vanessa shrieked, her voice hoarse and raw from her previous hysterical sobbing. "Honey, you have to tell them this is a massive mistake. Call a lawyer right now. Use our joint savings to bail us out. Clara has completely lost her mind and is trying to ruin our anniversary. Please, baby, do not let them take me to jail." Jamal walked slowly and deliberately across the crushed flower petals littering the gravel driveway. He did not rush. He did not display a single ounce of panic or concern. He approached the side of the police cruiser with the cool, detached demeanor of a corporate auditor inspecting a bankrupt acquisition. The 150 high society guests held their collective breath, watching the intense, highly public marital exchange unfold. Vanessa pressed her tear-stained face near the narrow opening of the window, reaching her trembling fingers out toward him. She genuinely believed her compliant, quiet husband was about to swoop in and aggressively rescue her from the catastrophic consequences of her own malicious criminal actions. Jamal stopped exactly 2 feet away from the patrol car door. He did not reach out to hold his wife's desperate, outstretched hand. Instead, he calmly reached inside his tailored suit jacket and withdrew a remarkably thick, heavily sealed manila envelope. He turned slightly, bypassing Vanessa completely, and handed the heavy package directly to the arresting officer standing guard next to the vehicle. Please ensure this envelope is placed securely with the suspect personal effects at the precinct, Jamal instructed the deputy, his deep voice carrying a lethal, unwavering calmness that echoed loudly across the silent courtyard. These are highly important legal documents she will urgently need to review while in custody. Vanessa frowned, her frantic sobbing momentarily pausing in utter confusion. Legal documents, she echoed, her voice trembling with sudden creeping dread. Jamal, what are you talking about? Just pay the bail money so we can go home. Jamal finally shifted his dark, penetrating gaze to look directly into his wife's terrified eyes. I will absolutely not be paying a single cent for your bail, Vanessa, he stated, his tone dropping to a freezing absolute zero. And I certainly will not be hiring a highly paid defense attorney to represent a remorseless, manipulative criminal. The documents inside that sealed envelope are officially filed divorce papers. I have already signed them. Vanessa's face drained of whatever residual color remained, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly as the reality of his words struck her like a physical blow. But that is not all. Jamal continued relentlessly, ensuring his voice was loud enough for the surrounding high society guests to hear every single devastating word clearly. That envelope also contains crystal clear high-definition photographs of you and your personal trainer entering and exiting multiple luxury hotel suites over the past 6 months. It includes detailed, itemized bank statements proving you secretly opened 3 massive credit lines using my personal social security number. I have officially filed a comprehensive police report for severe identity theft and blatant fraud for the $50,000 you explicitly stole from me to blindly fund your pathetic, fake, wealthy lifestyle. The game is permanently over, Vanessa. Do not ever attempt to contact me again. The sheer absolute devastation of Jamal's public revelation hit the crowd like a massive concussive shockwave. A chorus of loud, unrestrained gasps and shocked whispers erupted simultaneously from the affluent party guests. The wealthy suburbanites who had spent the entire afternoon sipping expensive champagne and complimenting Vanessa on her supposedly flawless, highly successful marriage were now actively recording her spectacular multi-layered destruction on their smartphones. Her perfectly curated, intensely guarded public image was not just cracked, it was completely, irreparably annihilated in a matter of mere seconds. In the back of the police cruiser, Vanessa let out a blood-curdling, guttural scream of pure, unadulterated agony. It was the horrific, shattering sound of a supreme narcissist watching her entire fabricated universe violently burn to ashes in front of her most important, highly judgmental audience. She thrashed aggressively against the heavy plastic seats, sobbing hysterically as the arresting officer quickly rolled the window up, sealing her pathetic, frantic wailing inside the heavily insulated vehicle. The lead sheriff signaled to his deputies with a swift hand gesture, and the line of marked patrol cars finally shifted into gear. The heavy engines roared loudly, thick tires crunching aggressively against the gravel as the convoy rolled steadily down the long, winding driveway, carrying Brenda and Vanessa away to the county jail. The flashing red and blue emergency lights slowly disappeared into the dark, encompassing night. The exact moment the police vehicles cleared the damaged iron gates, an immediate chaotic mass exodus instantly began. The 150 high society guests frantically rushed toward the temporary valet stand, completely desperate to retrieve their luxury cars and flee the toxic, scandal-ridden property as quickly as humanly possible. Nobody wanted to be closely associated with a disgraced family that had just been publicly arrested for multiple severe felonies and massive identity theft. Within 20 rapid minutes, the sprawling manicured estate was nearly entirely deserted, save for the massive empty white event tent and the scattered, expensive remnants of a violently aborted celebration. The profound, heavy silence returned to the massive property, broken only by the gentle rustling of the ancient oak trees in the cool, refreshing evening breeze. As the dust from the fleeing vehicles settled over the driveway, a single figure emerged from the shadows of the floral arrangements. My father Richard stepped onto the stone patio, his shoulders slumped in absolute defeat. Tears streamed down his aging face, catching the dim light. He walked slowly toward me, his hands clasped tightly together in a desperate begging gesture. "Clara, please," he whimpered pathetically, his voice cracking. "You have to call the district attorney tomorrow. You have to demand they drop these criminal charges. They are your mother and sister. We are a family. You cannot let them go to state prison for this." I stood completely motionless on the patio, my posture rigidly straight, my blazer immaculate. I looked down at the man who had spent my entire 33 years actively enabling my psychological abuse. "You stood by and watched them scheme to render me completely homeless, Richard," I stated firmly, my voice echoing like cold steel in the quiet night. "You stood by in complete silence while they viciously mocked my career, belittled my existence, and plotted to physically steal my hard-earned sanctuary. You let them abuse me my entire life simply to keep your own cowardly peace. You are not a protective father. You are just a weak bystander who only speaks up when consequences finally inconvenience you." Richard flinched violently as if I had struck him. "But Clara," he pleaded weakly, reaching a trembling hand out toward me. I took a decisive step back, my eyes flashing with absolute authority. "You are currently trespassing on my private property," I told him, my tone dropping to a lethal register. "Turn around, walk out of those broken gates, and leave my estate right now. If you are still standing on my lawn in exactly 60 seconds, I will personally call the sheriff back and have you arrested for criminal trespassing." Richard stared at my icy expression for an agonizing moment. Realizing he had no power left to manipulate me, he lowered his head, turned his back, and began the long, humiliating walk of shame down the dark gravel driveway, disappearing into the absolute darkness of the warm summer night. He dragged his heavy feet with every pathetic step, a broken man forced to face the miserable reality of the empty life he had chosen to blindly protect. Jamal and I stood side by side in the silence, watching him go. The peace that washed over my soul was worth every second of the wait. My toxic family was gone. The morning after the arrest brought a profound and unfamiliar stillness to my sprawling estate. I stood on the expansive wrap-around porch, with a hot cup of black coffee in my hand, looking out over the manicured lawns. The massive white event tent had been entirely dismantled and hauled away by the rental company just hours after the police cruisers departed. My professional landscaping team arrived at dawn to repair the muddy tire ruts and replant the crushed flower beds. As I watched them work, the heavy, suffocating weight that had compressed my chest for 33 years completely evaporated into the cool morning air. I was finally the absolute master of my own domain. Jamal walked out onto the porch, handing me a fresh pastry he had picked up from the local bakery down the street. We ate in a comfortable, deeply understanding silence. The legal fallout following the spectacular arrests was swift, merciless, and absolutely comprehensive. Brenda and Vanessa initially attempted to hire an aggressive, high-priced defense attorney to fight the multiple felony charges, arrogant enough to believe they could somehow charm their way out of a criminal indictment. Their profound delusion was shattered during the very first preliminary hearing. The county prosecutor presented an ironclad mountain of undeniable evidence. They had the high-definition security footage of the locksmith destroying my gates, the time-stamped audio recordings of their malicious plotting, the fraudulent lease agreement bearing my forged signature, and the sworn testimonies of over a dozen witnesses. Faced with the terrifying prospect of serving a lengthy sentence in state prison, their expensive defense attorney strongly advised them to immediately seek a comprehensive plea deal. They were backed into a massive legal corner with absolutely zero leverage. The final plea agreement was a spectacular testament to their absolute defeat. To avoid serving actual time behind bars, Brenda and Vanessa were forced to plead guilty to felony forgery, criminal trespassing, and severe property damage. The judge handed down a crushing sentence of 5 years on strict supervised probation. They were legally mandated to complete hundreds of hours of grueling community service, specifically assigned to a local waste management facility. Furthermore, the court ordered them to pay massive, crippling financial restitution for the physical damage caused to my custom iron gates and my professional landscaping. The sheer magnitude of the court-ordered fines combined with their exorbitant mounting legal fees completely drained my mother carefully hoarded savings accounts. The wealthy, untouchable suburban matriarch persona she had spent decades meticulously crafting was permanently obliterated in the harsh, unforgiving light of the criminal justice system. The catastrophic financial ruin forced Brenda and Richard into a deeply humiliating reality. Unable to maintain the crushing mortgage payments on their sprawling suburban house, they were swiftly forced into a rapid foreclosure. The bank seized the property, and my parents had to aggressively downsize their entire existence. They moved into a tiny, cramped two-bedroom apartment in a distinctly working-class neighborhood they used to openly mock. Richard lost his remaining social standing, completely ostracized by his former business associates, who wanted absolutely nothing to do with a family steeped in such a massive, highly public criminal scandal. He spent his days sitting silently in a small, dingy living room tethered to a bitter, resentful woman who constantly blamed him for her own spectacular downfall. Their toxic codependency became their ultimate, inescapable prison, completely devoid of the unearned luxury they once lorded over me. Vanessa faced a completely separate, equally devastating reckoning in family court. Jamal executed his divorce proceedings with the exact same ruthless clinical precision we had utilized to protect my estate. Armed with the undeniable financial records proving she had committed identity theft to secretly max out $50,000 in fraudulent credit card debt, Jamal easily secured a highly favorable divorce settlement. The explicit audio recordings and high-definition photographs documenting her reckless 6-month affair with her personal trainer completely destroyed any chance she had of claiming spousal support or securing a favorable asset division. The judge was visibly appalled by her blatant financial fraud and egregious infidelity. Vanessa walked away from her 10-year marriage with absolutely nothing but the designer clothes on her back and a mountain of toxic high-interest debt she was now solely responsible for repaying. Stripped of her wealthy husband, her fake social standing, and her golden child immunity, Vanessa was forced to move into the cramped apartment with our disgraced parents. The three of them were permanently trapped in a tiny, miserable space, constantly suffocating under the heavy weight of their shared failures. Vanessa lost her entire high society friend group. The wealthy women she had lied to so easily completely blocked her number, disgusted by the embarrassing public arrest and the sordid details of her criminal actions. She was forced to take a minimum wage job as a receptionist just to make her court-ordered restitution payments and cover her massive credit card bills. Her perfectly curated, flawless digital empire was deleted, entirely replaced by the grim, undeniable reality of a convicted felon serving strict probation and picking up trash along the county highway every single weekend. As my toxic family withered in the miserable consequences of their own malicious actions, my life expanded into a brilliant, unbothered era of absolute peace. The changing of the seasons brought a beautiful, vibrant renewal to my $4 million estate. The ancient oak trees shed their leaves and bloomed again, standing as silent witnesses to the incredible resilience of this sanctuary. I poured my energy entirely into my lucrative career as a supply chain executive, securing massive international contracts and earning a highly prestigious promotion to the global board of directors. The wealth I accumulated was no longer a secret I had to frantically hide to protect myself from greedy relatives. It was a powerful, recognized tool that I used to invest in sustainable organic farming initiatives and support local community shelters, transforming my financial independence into a force for genuine, widespread positive impact. Jamal remained a constant, deeply valued presence in my life. The shared trauma of navigating and dismantling the toxic abuse of my family had forged an unbreakable, profound bond of platonic solidarity between us. He frequently visited the estate on weekends, helping me design a stunning new architectural addition to the back patio. We spent long, quiet evenings sitting by the custom fire pit, drinking expensive vintage wine and discussing our respective career ambitions. He started his own highly successful independent architectural firm, completely unburdened by the massive financial drain of his deceitful ex-wife. We were two survivors who had successfully walked through the absolute fires of narcissistic abuse and emerged entirely victorious. We had become the supportive, functional family we both truly deserved, built entirely on a solid foundation of mutual respect, brutal honesty, and unwavering, fiercely protective loyalty to one another. I stand right now on the expansive stone balcony of my master bedroom, looking out over the serene, moonlit waters of the private lake bordering my property. The evening air is crisp and cool, carrying the sweet scent of blooming jasmine. There is no frantic ringing from my mobile phone. There are no passive-aggressive text messages demanding my financial compliance. There are no manipulative voicemails attempting to gaslight me into doubting my own reality. The toxic noise that plagued my entire existence has been completely and permanently silenced, replaced by the beautiful absolute tranquility of a life fully reclaimed. I raise my crystal glass of red wine, taking a slow, deeply satisfying sip. I look directly at the security cameras mounted discreetly along my pristine roofline, knowing they now serve only to protect a home filled with genuine happiness and impenetrable peace. My mother and sister firmly believed my silence was a sign of pathetic weakness. They fundamentally misunderstood the sheer devastating power of strategic patience. They assumed my lack of explosive anger meant I was an easy target, a vulnerable stepping stone on their path to unearned luxury. They did not realize I was simply handing them the pen and patiently letting them write their own undeniable legal convictions. I gave them enough rope to securely hang their own reputations in front of their peers. It takes a very special kind of arrogant blindness to trespass onto another person's land and attempt to steal it blindly. Have you ever had to step back and let deeply toxic family members dig their own inescapable graves? Have you ever utilized pure cold silence to outsmart people who severely underestimated your intelligence? Tell me your story in the comments section below. We build our armor from the battles we survive and win. Do not forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more content. And always remember, make absolutely certain you know who owns the property before you aggressively try to steal it in broad daylight. You might just regret it permanently. In the story of Clara and her toxic family, the most profound takeaway is the devastating power of strategic patience and the discipline of silence. When faced with deep betrayal or malicious plotting, our natural human instinct is to react immediately, to scream, defend ourselves, or passionately demand justice. However, toxic individuals thrive on these emotional explosions. They actively use our frantic reactions as fuel to twist the narrative and cast themselves as the victims. Clara's ultimate victory did not come from matching her family's chaotic energy or engaging in a screaming match at her front gates. Instead, she chose the hardest path of all, doing absolutely nothing to interrupt their inevitable downfall. By stepping back and mastering her own emotions, she allowed their overwhelming arrogance to completely blind them to the legal trap they were eagerly digging for themselves. The crucial lesson here is that you do not always need to prove your point or forcefully win an argument the exact moment you are wronged. True, undeniable power lies in maintaining your inner peace and letting the truth reveal itself through the natural, inescapable consequences of other people's actions. When we actively remove our emotional responses from toxic dynamics, we completely strip manipulators of their primary leverage. Silence is never a sign of weakness. It is a calculated, impenetrable fortress. This narrative teaches us that the best revenge is not seeking active destruction, but rather allowing those who seek to harm you to inevitably destroy themselves through their own unchecked hubris. We must learn to vigorously protect our peace guard, our resources, and let our unyielding boundaries do the talking. Take a step back from the toxic dynamics in your own life today. And ask yourself where your silence might be far more powerful than your words.